what's going on, guys? It's me, Trainman, and we are back in Tain. And I was going to make a Huey Lewis in the News joke there, but I didn't quite feel like singing, and I'm sure you guys didn't either. Anyways, didn't feel like listening to me, I mean. We're back in Tain doing work on the Iron Horseman Railroad, getting it prepped for to rule the world. Gonna be honest right now, and this might be talked about on the podcast, but there's been a little bit of a hiccup in that Wybolt's computer has sort of, it's decided to part ways with Gary's mod, I guess is the best way to put it. So we may be running into some trouble there, but we're definitely going to get this thing out at some point. Anyways, there was in fact a breakthrough on it today, might I mention. So, this video is a little bit late, but in this video we're getting rid of more of these invisible signals. I take care of the water. I tidy up some of the scenery that's disappeared because some assets were not compatible, just straight up not compatible at all. And past that, I actually, what did I do? Oh, I started doing a little bit more terrain work towards the end, which you'll see. Anyways, gonna be honest here, gonna point something out. So if you're making a forest with speed trees, use blue push pins, and you'll see what I mean. Use the blue push pins because you can put down all of these blue push pins. You can then replace asset and have them automatically rotated to some extent, and it will automatically rotate the trees so they're randomized. They're not all facing the same direction, which is awesome. I tried here with the Tain track in. I didn't think it looked as good, but I might go back to it. This would be the time to upgrade the route in any significant capacity if I wanted to. Anyways, let's move on to the question for this week, and that was about crossing the plains by Mason P. in episode 184. Now, the full wording of this question is actually quite significant. What happened while traveling through the plains between the Midwest and Mariah's Pass? You mentioned zombies would group up there, but not much else. I traveled the route myself, and between Chicago and the pass, it takes a and a half day. That's interesting wording. Going 79 miles per hour with only a couple stops, and that's large sections of cement ties and welded rail, which I believe is more recent than 2012. It is one track with passing sidings, so would you often have to move trains stopped on the main? What did you do about the groups of zombies? Also, there are practically no trees and almost no water for probably hundreds of miles on the plains, and very few, if any, I didn't see any, coal trains between the pass and Minnesota. Although there are plenty of grain and crude trains. What did he do about the lack of resources in this huge area to get across? Now, this is a hell of a question, I'm going to be honest. Because, speaking of hell, actually, the first thing to point out is, at the beginning of this journey, and yes, the zombies definitely group up. It's a large empty space, and they can see and hear for great distances, and they'll go after one person. You'll see a bunch that'll congregate on one person, and then they'll either kill or assimilate that person, so to speak. And then they'll move on to the next person. You get these individuals, and then groups, and then larger groups, and then larger groups, until you have these slow-traveling hordes of, thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands. So, that is something that we had to look out for and worry about while we were out there on the plains. And we came across that once or twice. One time was on Mariah's Pass, and then another time, because I say once or twice because I'm not sure if I want to count the pass one. There was another time pretty much in the middle of nowhere that we had to deal with a fairly significant group. That, in and of itself, could have cost us if we weren't particularly prepared / particularly, experienced. But anyways, we got to Chicago, and we were running as close as you can get when you're with a steam locomotive. We were running on fumes. We were burning nearby forestry, and in the end it came down to burning grilled charcoal in the firebox, which is not good for it, as you might expect. And this, once we got out of Chicago, though, we did in fact find a coal train, and we sort of made this. We made a very similar realization to what Mason pointed out. We've got a lot of flat, open terrain ahead of us. This may be the last fuel we see. You know, we know what the terrain is going to be like, and we know what we can pull on flat terrain, and we loaded up with coal. Coming out of Chicago, we had probably, I don't know, anywhere between 5 and 10 extra full hoppers, so about 13, and we dropped most of those as they emptied. And that's a lot of coal to use, but we weren't just using the coal for the locomotive, and also due to the fact that when we stopped in the middle of nowhere. We used, we kept the locomotive running and did anything we could to keep power on, because had we not been doing that when we were in North Dakota, we would have had a significant problem. Or was it South Dakota? We were in the Dakotas. We wouldn't have been prepared or really even knowing that we were about to be assaulted. But as for water, there's more in the way of farms and streams out there than you'd expect. We did, or at least I did, my best to be careful with my expenditure of it, because it is the middle of nowhere. But, it can be a little bit dry, but at the same time, most of the time you're going to find farms with irrigation ditches and stuff like that. And once you get to Glendive, you're moving along the river, so you are fine. Is Glendive the right thing, or is that that's too far south? Not Glendive. But there's plenty of rivers all up Marias Pass, or all up the lead up to Marias Pass. It's less arid than you'd expect. It's not, Utah levels of desert. And also there are several significant reservoirs where that area, be quiet, that area is pretty much gravity pressure fed. And the water supply continues to exist even as the humans do not. So water was less of a problem than fuel was, and fuel, we managed to mitigate that problem. And then once we got into the pass, we cut off all but 3, or was it 2 hoppers? You can see in the intro of this video. But once we got into the pass, we cut off every extra hopper we had, because we knew it was going to be a climb to get up there. And it did take us a few days to get across. The 3254 is not a 79 mile per hour runner, and it's also not an engine that we run 24/7. It wasn't a couple of stops. It was go during the day, stop during the night, go during the day, stop during the night. And so that was 3 or 4 days once we got out of Chicago, and we came out of Chicago because we had to avoid the city proper, sort of pointing in the wrong direction. And we had to weasel our way back around to Marias Pass, because we knew we were going to go over Marias Pass. It's one of the easier crossings, and due to the fact that it's up in the Pacific Northwest, it's one of the more, or well, it's getting close to it, I should say. It's one of the more lush and there's more water up there, is what I'm saying. Again, I wanted to avoid Utah and things of that sort. And I wasn't interested in going through Colorado. And also, I was trying to get to Portland in the end anyways, so it put me on the right sort of track. There was a lot of deliberation. When you're making that decision to go west, it was a lot of argumentation and a lot of debate and, many, many hours sort of plotting and thinking and seeing, okay, is there anybody out there that we know that we can get in contact with? And the answer was no. No, there wasn't. So, we were really on our own out there, and of course you run into these little settlements, little groups of people, or individuals, in some cases, and you can give them a boost, or they can give you a boost, or both, if they're those kinds of people. But, at the same time you run into the opposite kind of people, which the pass itself, the book, is, it harps about quite heavily. But it certainly wasn't, it may have been one of the more difficult things we did, but it certainly was not insurmountable seeming. It was at the point where we had experience of a couple years of running the train, and we knew that resources would be scarce, and we knew that we sort of had to double-check everything we did before we got into anything. So that saved us, again, it saved us with the coal, because we knew, okay, we can get a train this heavy moving on flat ground. As long as we get rid of it before we really start getting into the pass, we should be fine. And that was completely correct. And it was this is all farmland, we should almost definitely be able to get a hold of irrigation ditches and stuff like that, which was also completely correct. And and as for the zombies, once we made it out of Chicago, we didn't have to deal with very much in the way of zombies. We passed through most of the towns, and when we stopped outside of them. Of course, we had to do some foraging within towns, but that was at our own discretion and our own choice. Until, somewhere in the middle of North Dakota, in nowhere North Dakota, we found ourselves not surrounded, but in trouble with this enormous group. And it was really essentially, it wasn't kill them all, it was kill enough of them to buy us enough time to get the hell out. Which is exactly what we did. So, it's, when you have groups like that, if you're not a completely coordinated and funded and supplied military, you don't take those kinds of groups on. And we didn't. Now, as for trains on the main, generally, it was rare to have an engineer that would do that. Not just because you typically just want to get your train off the main, blah, 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 or you're trying to get home to blah, 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 if you know that, you're trying to get home to your family, if you know that, the world's end is coming, essentially. World War Z has begun, the Great Panic, everybody's freaking out. But it was the fact that when you're running a train, generally commercially, you don't just, you're not necessarily in tune to everything else that's going on, because you have to pay absolute attention to the train itself. And once you get through that, and, you'd get off at a yard or something, unless the dispatcher has explicitly told you something, or, if you don't hear from the dispatcher, you go until you can't. And people tried to keep things going as long as they could, but not only just because of the basic logistics of generally the trains don't stop and people don't find out until you're in a yard or someplace like that, but because, but also because it was very rare to have somebody get bitten and then go into work and then subsequently transform into a zombie while on the job, which, as far as I understand, happened once or twice, or, a few times. We found evidence of it once or twice. But it's not particularly common at all. And so there were a couple of times where, we're barreling across the plains and we see something in the distance. Generally, Sniper in the caboose, who's got more zoom than any of us have, there's something on the track ahead, radios, tells the conductor who's in the caboose, radios the cab, tells us to put on the brakes or at least slow down to basically visual stopping distance. And then we get up to where we can identify it, stop, and see what we can do. Most of the time, it was occasional that we'd find trains that had no fuel whatsoever, which was a problem. But on the other hand, it was more than likely to find something where we could just get in it and move it out of the way. So, anyways, more questions on that, direct them in the comments, and keep laying on the questions. I've got plenty of material, but I certainly don't want to run out. So, I'll see you guys next week. Trainman out.